ready to go.
So
So
just
mute
push
it
that
again.
one. Okay, yeah, please.
Yeah, mute.
Now it's on. There's 2 buttons on the bottom. I do digital technology all the time. Yeah. My 22-year-old laughs at me that I do this for work because they know the internet much better than I do. So in this line of work, one of the most amazing things is meeting people and being exposed to voices that we would not otherwise hear. I've met some of the most amazing humans doing this work through Digital Pedagogy Lab. And really, honestly, just through doing some of the work that we do on Twitter, using the DigPed hashtag, that sort of thing. And I don't actually know when I first ran into Rasul Al-Rubaira's work, but I remember thinking, this is somebody I need to know. And not just this is somebody I need to read, but this is someone who I need to hear from. And this is a voice that is really, really important. There's something about Rasul's work that humbles me. And it's because it's the sort of work that is so authentic and so genuine and so unassuming, that here I am, and I'm over on my blog and I'm ranting and rah 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 rah, and then and then Rasul comes in and she says the most amazing things, and it's so peaceful and so like, it's just so, I feel like I'm learning lessons when I read her work. So last night I had the pleasure of meeting Rasul for the first time, and we went to dinner. And on the way to dinner, we were walking, and she was talking about, we were about to meet Bonnie Stewart, and she was talking about being a little bit nervous about meeting Bonnie because she knows her work and how exciting it was going to be and everything. And I looked at Rasul and I was like, yeah, well, some people are nervous to meet you too, because everyone reads your work and is excited about your work too. And I was one of those people. I was nervous to meet you. I was so over the moon happy when you accepted being a keynote here, because having that sort of quality of person keynote an event that is supposed to be about human beings, right? We call it Digital Pedagogy Lab, but it really is about human beings. And I think that sometimes you find a voice that transcends that digital and finds the human, and I think that's what Rasul's work does for me. So it's really an honor to have her here with us today. And then there's the written part. Rasul Al-Rubel. We talked about how to say her name, and I'm really bad about it, and I'm really sorry. Apparently, there's many different ways to pronounce this the name, and we had a whole conversation in the car about it. But Rasul works on literacy and student voice at the Writing Project, where she is the executive director. She's also an education writer and a student voice advocate. She has taught English composition and literature to high school, college, and undergraduate students for 10 years. She's written with Edutopia, Education Week, The Guardian, PBS NewsHour, EdWeek Teacher, Teaching Tolerance, ASCD's Educational Leadership, EdSurge, Annenberg Learner Foundation, Medium, and others. So it's not hard to find her out there. She's a TEDx speaker and a social media influencer on education, race, and equity. Her work focuses on teacher professional development and training, pedagogical practices in and out of the classroom, English language learners, equity and social justice, and media literacy as a means for professional development. And we are very, very pleased to have her here. Please welcome Rasul Al-Rubel.
Hello, does this work? Okay. Okay, so I was hoping that I could walk around and, but I think I'm gonna have to be, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, so sorry for the technical difficulties. That always happens. So my name is Rizal Arabel, and I feel so lucky to be here today. And he brought me to tears with his introduction, Sean. Um, I met him again on Twitter, as most connected educators meet their other connected educators, and it has been fabulous. I don't remember exactly what our first conversation was, but it was 2014. That's when I became connected. I saw the DigPed hashtag, and I think I joined the chat. And I was a little bit intimidated of joining the chat at first because they all sounded very smart and they knew what they were talking about and asking all the right questions. But once I joined, it felt very safe. And I think we'll talk a little bit about safe communities today and the power of being connected as educators. So please feel free to engage online. I believe the hashtag is DigPed. Feel free to add the account as well as myself so that I could connect with you later on, because that's the whole beauty of this, is just to meet new people and connect with each other. I wanted to thank Sean and Jesse for creating this opportunity for myself, but as well as everybody else who's here to attend this conference. When I first heard about the fact that they want to do a parallel institute that is as a result of the travel ban, it was very touching for me. And touching is kind of it's a small word to describe the big feelings that I had. Myself and my husband, who's sitting in the front row, Mustafa, after the travel ban, and I really like to call it a Muslim ban because that's what it was. After the Muslim ban happened, it was very hard for us to travel to the States and we rely on this for our living. And crossing the border was the most terrifying thing. And although I'm no longer a refugee, it does state in my passport, my country of birth, which is Iraq. And so I had a lot of fears about, them looking at my passport and being detained. They were checking out my Twitter timeline and social media and what I talk about and all the anti-Trump sentiments that I have, that I talk about. And at the same time, I still made it to Colorado a month ago, and that was kind of a very brave act that I felt like I did, because I felt like I'm putting my safety at risk. And so thank you for the opportunity, because that's our social and political climate, and that's what's happening, and that's what a lot of Muslims and people of color are feeling at this time. And I wanted to talk a little bit about writing and voice, because it's so important for us as educators to find our voices, and most importantly, to cultivate a safe environment for our students to express themselves and find their own voices. I hope everyone has read this poem by Maya Angelou. She's one of my favorites. And a couple of years ago, we were in the classroom, and I had asked them to we were talking about poetry, and they find it so boring. It was one of the most tedious topics to talk about in college English class. And so, you can bring song lyrics, and we can share them with each other. And so one of my students, she brought this poem with her. And she volunteered to read it out loud. And I was so amazed at the fact that that was her favorite poem, but the fact that she wanted to read it out loud. So she read this out loud. And that experience alone was kind of everybody stopped fidgeting in the class and just started listening to her. And when I asked her why she picked that poem, I will always remember her response. She said, "Miss, I have this poem on my mirror in my bedroom, and every day I wake up, I look at it to feel more confident, because you see, as a Black woman, I walk in society. Society tells me I'm not beautiful enough, and this poem empowers me to believe in myself." The fact that she shared that with all of us with tears in her eyes brought everyone else to tears. And I'll always remember that, because that moment was clear to me of how much we need to open up our classroom doors and really have the discussion about topics that really relate to students. What are we talking about in the classroom if we're not discussing things that matter to them? And here's again where I saw that there's so much opportunities for us as teachers and professors to allow students to reflect on these issues that matter to them. And I also thought, the idea that students do not need to change to be accepted in society. They do not need to assimilate and conform to what society expects them to be so that they can fit in or so that they need to be heard. It's so important for us to not have that expectations. And I know we as teachers don't do it intentionally, but we all come with our own biases. And so, when I was at that moment, I thought it's so important to be cognizant of that, and what students come with their own baggage. And so we have to kind of realize this as people. So here's where I thought it's so important for students to write, but at the same time, for myself, I was in the classroom, and when I was in the classroom, I was warned about being on social media. I was warned not to create social media accounts as a professor, because especially if your students find you or they follow you, that's the end of it. If your student follows you, just delete your account. And so I never created, a Facebook account, or I deleted my Facebook the minute I got into graduate school. When I was doing my MA, I had no Facebook, no social media whatsoever, because that's what we were taught to do in order for you to be a good academic. At least that's what was happening in my circle of academics back in Toronto, if you're wondering where I'm from. And so I had no idea that social media existed for educators, or even as a means to professionally develop yourself, or to write, or to connect with other people. And so sadly enough, I joined Twitter in 2014, and I feel like ever since I discovered it, I've been missing out on this wonderful pool of information and people to connect with, to benefit myself as a person professionally, but also personally. And so I hopped on Twitter and I started engaging with educators and connecting with them. And I was still in the classroom at that time. And so when I went back, after once the semester started, I did that during, between semesters, I believe. When I went back to the classroom, and I didn't want to tell my colleagues that I created a Twitter account, because they're going to think less of me. They're not going to think, I'm a good professor. And I was one of the young professors there. She's 23 years old. And she just graduated from Ryerson University. And so I didn't want to tell them I created a Twitter account, because, again, my credibility is going to go down the drain. So slowly, I started talking to the people next to me that I trusted. And I said, oh, yeah, you know what? I discovered this. And, and look, there are tons of resources there that you could use. And there's something called digital storytelling. Hi, Jen. She's my librarian sitting right there. That's And so some people believed in it and checked it out and created their own accounts, and some people said, no, that's not good. Social media is not good. Let's stay away from it. But they're missing out. They're missing out on connecting with amazing people, folks like these guys and all of you, because how are we going to know what's happening in the world if we don't connect with each other? And I think that's what social media does today. It allows us to really understand each other, but also digital literacy and social media works to humanize social issues, and it works to also humanize people. And so that's something that we always need to remember. The power of social media can create a lot of pathways of hope. And so while I was on social media and I saw all this amazing work, I still saw that there are things that are missing. There are missing blocks that I didn't know how to connect. What was missing? And so in my classroom, I discussed these issues, social justice and equity, just like the example I gave with my student. But I found that when I was on social media, I couldn't discuss these issues as a teacher, as an educator, and I couldn't really talk about whispers, race, or religion, or identity on social media as a professor. And so I kind of went back again to my own isolated self and my own wall and thinking, this is really great and everything, and we can all be retweeting #wow, but not #Black Lives Matter. And why not? Why aren't we doing that? So I had to work really hard, but I found my own group of people, a community that cares about these issues as well. And here is where intersectionality is so important, because we can be educators, but we are also people. We also come with our own identities. I am an Iraqi Muslim Canadian. That's who I am. And most of you all come with your own identities. And why are we taking that away from really education? Why aren't we talking about these issues that matter to us, and more importantly, that matter to our students? However, even with our own communities, there are some injustices that we need to point out. And so not all communities are free spaces, and not all communities are safe. And so when we see that, for me, it took a while, but I had to see that I needed to actually speak out on issues, regardless if those were my people. And silence, when we're silent, we're complicit. And it's important to talk about things that matter to you. So that's not to say that all communities are, perfect, but we need to shed light on injustices that happen even within our safe communities. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about how that all intersects with youth and how that intersects with organizing and politics and the history of really organizing in youth and education. I'm sure you all know this, but the sit-in movement was actually what stemmed from the civil rights movement. And the sit-in movement started off with 4 young Black men who were in university. And what happened was they came and they sat at a bar, and they just sat and they ordered a drink. And that was their way of gaining rights. They sat, and they weren't obviously allowed to sit there, but they still sat. And, day after day, they kept sitting at that bar and ordering drinks. And more Black youth joined them. And so the civil rights movement happened. We need to remember that social justice is usually youth movements that are coming together and fighting for things that they believe in because they're not heard. And so, students and student activism is often the root of what's going on, and we need to support that. So after that sit-in movement, a committee called Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was born. And it was basically the start of civil rights. I'd like to share this quote from Melinda Anderson. She's on Twitter. If you are not following her, you should be. She's amazing, and she's a writer with The Atlantic. The fact that students are, they were fighting for budget cuts and out-of-school suspensions. At that time, they were fighting for their basic rights. But right now, student activism is embedded in these, racial issues. And, the idea that these movements happen when, things like we call it microaggressions, but they're actually macroaggressions. The fact that Black students are being accused of following white students to their dorms. Oh, they're not giving the same opportunity of admission as white students. It's important to recognize and create the space to have their voices heard. And what does that mean, really? What we really need to think about is the fact that let me introduce you to students, not suspects. So this group, the Los Angeles Unified School District, basically runs, checks metal detectors for their students. And so everyone who walks through the school, they have to walk through the metal detectors, even if the student has done nothing wrong or they've not done nothing to harm. There's nothing, sorry. Okay, so this movement was born in Los Angeles, and basically it's the fact that students are seen as suspects. So, and it's important to remember that, it's not all students that are seen as suspects. It's usually people of color. It's students of color that are seen as suspects. And so one of the organizing educators reached out to me, and he said, we have this movement, and how can we really, we'd love to get amplified, because that's what we're doing. And so, one of their leader, he's a student leader, he said, I'd like to write about this because it's so important to me. And I said, please do, write an article and we'll share it. And I love the fact that, he was on his phone and he just wrote it. And he was messaging me back and forth on Facebook Messenger, and he said, I don't know how to start. I don't know what to write. And I said, well, what's happening? Why is this cause so important to you? And this is his answer. Oh, sorry, his answer is before the video. He said, we've been fighting for the elimination of this policy because schools should be like our second homes, not like prisons. The fact that they go through metal detectors to enter school, how do you feel about that? The idea that students are seen as criminals instead of creators. And so I said, that's exactly what it is. Then write it down. And his post was amazing. If you guys want to take a look at it, I have the link as well. But I'd like to just show this video.
I don't know where really I want to be because I have a lot of talents. I can cook, I can act, I can filmate, I can draw, and so I don't even know what I'm a good music maker. I make beats, raps, sing. See, I have a lot of talents. I just don't know what I'm gonna do actually. I was about, I'll say 14, 13. I was searching my old middle school, John Mayer Middle. I was in English class. It was me and my friends in English class who was taking notes, actually. And cops came and they said, we're doing a random search. And they were searching for drugs, so they put us out of class. They made us do this, I don't know, cross position, like we was on the cross. They told me to open up my backpack. As I'm opening it up, they got my backpack out of my hand. They just dumped everything out. That was even more disrespectful to me. One of my friends, he was getting searched and they told him to take off his shirt and his shoes. First he just lifted his shirt up. He's like, I'm not about to take my shirt off because I feel uncomfortable. So he just lifted it up. Then they like forcibly just like pulled it up and searched him. But the way they did it, the way they picked me and my friends out, they said we want those kids back there. There was more students in the back of the class, so of course we was all looking like, who? And they said them 3 black kids back there. But it made me not care about school because I didn't want to feel or be the person they tried to make me be, and that's a criminal. And also one of my main goals was to make my mom happy and graduate. I am a chef.
What's your favorite thing to cook?
Cheesecake. We are students, not suspects.
It's so important to amplify their voices and what they're doing right now. Why am I showing you this? So these students are obviously in middle school and high school, but the fact of the matter is these students will go to colleges and universities, and they were treated like criminals in their schools. And how are they going to be sitting there in their classrooms and be treated in the same way as their white peers who are not going through the same thing? Sorry, guys. Okay. Another group that I wanted to share with you is Muslim Girls Making Change. So while students, not suspects, use the hashtag, they wrote an article, they wrote a lot of articles, and they reached out to social media and publications to amplify their voice and really change what's happening in their schools. There are students that are doing activism in a different way. So they are 4 fabulous women who are Muslim women, and if you notice that there are black Muslims and brown Muslims and an Arab with them as well. So there's a lot of intersectionality there. And they are a slam poetry group, and their activism is basically through poetry. And they stand in front of audiences and talk about issues that matter to them. When I did an interview with them last week, if you want to check it out on my website. When I asked them why it's important for them to talk about these issues, they said because that's what mattered, but most importantly, they felt that their voices were not heard in the classroom. They said, we think that our voices were not heard. More importantly, they felt like they were insignificant. And so the fact that they created their own platform to talk about issues that matter to them, more importantly, social justice issues, I think it's fabulous. We can do that in our schools, and we can support these kind of movements in our classrooms as well. Here's another amazing person that I was able to know about from my friend Jenny K. Dupuy, who's also an amazing educator on Twitter. If you are not following her, please make sure you are. An amazing author. And she is 12 years old, but she's fabulous. So I'll just share her story here as well.
Oh, Fix Auto.
Autumn Pelche. I come from the Wiklungkung unceded territory, and I'm Indigenous. I'm 12 years old. I am in grade 7. I started speaking around ages 8. Well, I started speaking in my own community. My Auntie Josephine always taught me about water and the importance because what she talks about is water. And so she kind of mentored or inspired me to do the work I'm doing today.
Everyone, let's give a great big warm welcome to Autumn Pelche.
When I put tobacco in the water, I'm praying for the water, and that's sending good energy and prayers. So that's just hope, I guess I could say. I speak for the water because water is alive and it does have a spirit, and she hurts every day because of what the people are doing to her today in the world. Polluting the water, dumping toxic waste, even just garbage. I do what I do because our water is sick. The people who own the factories of the world are disrespecting Mother Earth and making our water sick. They are killing her. Mother Earth has been in existence for billions of years, and she doesn't need us, we need her. I met Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for the first time in 2016, I'm pretty sure. I just told him like about the water issue and what I want to be done and the water crisis and the First Nations communities that can't drink their water. I feel proud about it because I know that for the children that want to speak up but maybe they're too afraid, I'm speaking up for them, and maybe what the work I'm doing will encourage them to do the work I'm doing, and we can all try and make a change.
So with these examples, I truly feel that it's important for us to create a culture of connectivity in the classroom. Most of these students need that outreach in order for their voices to be heard. And it's also important for us, we often talk about, giving students a voice. Let's give student voices. We need to remember that students already have voices. Right? They all have voices and they need to be heard. But it's important for us to create the conditions for them to support their voices and cultivate the right conditions and environment for them to express themselves, who they are, and what they care about. And I don't know if you've if you've ever heard of Michael Fielding. He wrote a lot about supporting student voice, and he talks about evaluating the conditions that allows for student voice to happen. And he focuses on listening and speaking, and it's important to think about these aspects. Who's listening in the classroom? And who's speaking in the classroom? Who's allowed to speak in the classroom? What are the conditions that we're creating for students to speak up in the classroom? And it doesn't have to obviously mean, hi, I have an opinion, but really, how are they expressing themselves through writing, social media, or whatever it is that the tools that you're using as educators? The organizational culture is also so important. What are we creating in the classroom for students to actually have conversations? How are we having conversations in the classroom? And more importantly, focusing on action. What can we do? What can we do to improve? And then move on to improve and better the future. So for me, I always think about micro interactions. I had a conversation the other day about these micro interactions that we can do in schools and the classroom, but then when I talked to the person I'm talking to, I thought, these are actually macro interactions. So depending on how you're gonna see it, for me, curriculum is the first thing that we need to focus on to amplify student voice. So what are we teaching our students? What kind of material are we bringing in the classroom? For me as a professor, when I started out, I didn't know what to bring in the classroom. And oftentimes, I asked my colleagues, what are you teaching? What textbook are you teaching? And so they would share their textbooks, and then I'd have to go and explore and read if that text is actually working for me. And I've taught textbooks, or not textbooks, texts that don't really speak to me. And I felt like I needed to teach them because so-and-so next door is teaching in 150. And so I needed to discuss that article as well with my students. And here I am sitting there, not really connecting myself with the text, and how am I expecting my students to connect to it? And so it took a lot of, talking to myself and reflecting for me to be able to shift that and pick stories and nonfiction pieces that really speak to me, but also to my students as well. And I always had to remind myself, oftentimes, if something speaks to me, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to speak to my students. So sometimes I have to force myself to read a story or an article that's, that's actually, the topic is speaking to my students, but it's because we're going to have a great conversation. And I learn a lot from these interactions. I find that when I'm teaching something that I'm not necessarily interested in, they're teaching me a lot about it. And the school culture and community, and I think here's, again, like that's part of the macro-micro interaction. What are we building to create a community and school culture? I know that one teacher I talked to the other day, he said that they're doing diversity nights. And I said, that sounds great. And he said, yeah, but it's just one night. And I thought, but it's a start. And he said, yeah, but they need to do better. And so I don't know, there are different ways. What can we do to expand diversity night, to make it not diversity night, and make it an actual thing that is really integrated well in the school culture and community? And platforms. I think platforms are so important. We're having so many conversations about using social media, but as well, for me, I had to discover that students can have their own websites and they can have their own blogs, and that only happened after I jumped on social media. So the idea is that it's so ironic that when you jump on social media, you learn a lot about how to be a better educator for your students. And many people would probably think that's not true because you can't rely on social media to be a better educator. But I truly believe that social media has helped me become a better educator and a better person even. I'm connected now with so many people that are teaching me amazing things that I wouldn't have been able to learn about on my own. And so for me, when I told my students, you know what, I started blogging 6 months ago, and guys, let's do this. Let's start blogging as a class. And they said, what's blogging? And I said, okay, well, step by step. And so, we went to the computer lab, and I booked it a couple of times, week after week. And every time we go, I'm like, okay, here's, I did, the demo. The first class was a demo, basically. It was like me showing them my blog. And you know where my blog was? I didn't even have a home. It was on Medium. And so I had to log in Medium, and I said, I found this really cool place where we can blog and we can share our writing with other people. And they said, but I don't want somebody to read my writing. And I said, no, but it's amazing and such a good opportunity for you to get your voice out there. But I don't have anything to say, miss. What am I going to write about? And so, there was a lot of pushback. There was so much pushback and tug and pull. And often I felt like, you know what? Screw it. Why am I doing it? Why? How is this, if they don't want to do it, then why am I forcing it on them? But they did do it, and they created their own blogs, and it wasn't on Medium. They went to Blogger, and they picked their own themes, and half of my students were English language learners. And so you might think, well, obviously, what's wrong with English? No, because they were sitting in my classroom expecting me to teach them how to write. And here they are creating a WordPress website, or it was Blogger, I believe, the platform. And then finally, when they got their websites up and running, they're like, I can't wait to write about this. I can't wait to talk about this, miss. Can I write a blog post about it? Oh, yes. And so we would sit there and read articles, and we read, so what are you anyway? And they're like, Miss, Lawrence Hill, that's such a great story. I can't believe they were mean to that kid because she's biracial. Can I write a blog post about it? Yes, please do, and share it with me. And when I go and comment, they come to me the next day. They don't comment back because we still haven't talked about, feedback and commenting and all of that. But they come to me the next day and they said, Miss, you read my blog and you wrote a comment on it. And it's fabulous. So the fact of the matter is, they created their own blogs and they felt empowered. And not only are they empowered now, but they actually believe that writing is fun. And that was, to me, I'm like, my job is done. But at the same time, we need real sustained support. So it's not a one-time thing, right? My students blogged, and that's great and everything, but how are they going to continue this type of learning when they go on to the next teacher and throughout their college years or university years? And so semester after semester, we need to all be on the same page. So for me, in terms of real sustained support, I felt like at the college, unfortunately, did not have that. So what I was trying to do in the classroom, it was being dismantled by what the system is creating. And it was a little bit disappointing at times. And I felt like, well, I guess I'll share my story now. I was going to share it later, but no, I'll share it later. Something came to me, and then and then I'm like, okay. So no, I wanted to share the story of why I left the classroom. So I'll share that after I finish those points. But it's important for us to really have an awareness about what's going on. And I feel like when I had my students blog, and don't even get me started about their reaction when I told them, let's use Twitter and chat. And so that didn't go too well. So we didn't end up doing that. We just started blogging. And we also did digital storytelling, which is so powerful. And I will share one example with you in a second. But it really, they kept asking me, are my blogs going to be seen by other people? And I said, well, I don't know. We just have to, keep writing. And don't think about that. Just keep writing. And, if you reach one person, then that's amazing. And so some people came to me the next day or the day after or a couple of weeks after, and they would be so excited that they had like 15 views on their blogs from random countries. And they said, is this real, Miss? Yeah, I think it is. And the fact that, sometimes I would tweet out their blogs and I say, I'm so excited. My student wrote about this topic. And they would get, obviously, views, because when you tweet about it, they don't share it on social media, of course. It's too embarrassed to share on their Facebook. But they get views, and that mattered to them so much. And their faces, they were, it's like, oh, I wonder if people read my work. The other point that I think is so important to focus on in creating a culture that supports student voice is representation in education. And so oftentimes, in higher education especially, it's very white. And there's a lack of diversity and a lack of people of color. There's a lack of representation. And I think that's very problematic. And it's something that we need to think about, especially if we are in the leadership roles or in the decision-making roles. This is something that we need to change. When I used to teach and I stand at the podium and I talk to my students, and the walls were glass, and so you could see right through it. And so when people pass by, students pass by, I get a lot of people or students, they stop and stare at me. And they just continue to stare. And I say, hi, are you supposed to come in? Are you a student here? No. And so, that happens all the time. And I started to wonder, why are students doing that? Why are they just stopping and watching me teach? And then it hit me, because I'm one of the only faculty members in Seneca's English and Liberal Studies program that was wearing a hijab, and they liked that. That only hit me that moment when I asked one person to come inside. Like, come inside. And he said, no. And I said, no, just come inside. So he opened the door, hey, miss, how are you? And it's like, okay, how's it going? What's going on? What are you doing? Do you want to join us? No, I'm just looking. And okay, can you tell me why you're looking? I know I get that a lot. You know, students just stand there. Why did you do that? You know, I put him on the spot, poor guy. Well, he wasn't in the class, and so he just said, I just wanted to say Assalamu alaikum because you're Muslim, and I hardly ever see Muslim professors here. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah. And he said, they're all old and white. And that might have hurt my colleagues, obviously, but that got me to think, how sad is it that he has to stand there and watch a Muslim woman teach because he's never seen it before at the college. And it was kind of a point of me, like a moment where I felt sad, but at the same time, I felt proud that, I am there and I am teaching and I am pushing boundaries, sadly. And so at the end of the day, it's so important for students to see, as Marian Edelman once said, you can't be what you can't see. If students don't see themselves, then there's sadly no hope. We need to provide that hope for them. And so we talked a lot about this, to empower them to be digital creators. And I'm so excited to share this digital story with you all. So with this digital story, after we experimented with blogging, my next semester, I said, you know what? I'm going to try something called digital storytelling. And I didn't know what that means. I didn't. I found out about it on Twitter. And, I saw teachers, and they're like, digital storytelling with, and then they put the app next to it. And I'm just like, so I ignored all of that because I hate all the edtech and promoting. I know it's, I own my own edtech, but at the same time, I still find it to be kind of like, okay, but I'd like to try digital storytelling. I just don't know how. And so I looked around and I looked at all the blogs that teachers were sharing, and none of them taught me step by step how to get your students to do a digital story. And then I reached out to my librarian, Jennifer Peters, who's sitting right here. And I said, Jennifer, I saw that you have, Jen, that's what I call her, not Jennifer. I saw that something is going on with the sandbox. You guys are doing a lot of digital media. Can you help me? And she said, yes, we are actually rolling out this new thing in the sandbox where we help you do digital storytelling with your students. And I said, what a coincidence. Are you serious? And she said, oh, yeah. And I said, how many teachers are doing it? She said, not many right now, but we're trying to get them started. And I said, okay, great. What can I do? She said, let's book a time, and she'll come to my classroom and help talk to my students and show them how to do a digital story. So I said, okay, great. And she came and she talked to my students and she showed them how to do it. We did a workshop where they just, they had everything. They had the handouts and the instructions and the websites that they need to go to. And after Jen left, I said, isn't this exciting? We're going to try digital stories. And they said, no. And I said, why not? And you have those bad days where you go home and you're like, I had a bad day at school. And that was one of the, I had a bad day because my students weren't excited about what I was excited about. And so it took 2 weeks for us to get excited about it. It took a lot of time. And this specific story that I'm going to share with you is done by Alexi. And Alexi in particular, and I like this story, not because of, his story is amazing, but the process that Alexi went through was just fabulous. So Alexi would resist. He would say, I'm in accounting, miss, and I don't know why I'm doing this. He said, I don't know. And, my English is not good. And I say, okay. And so I'm sitting there just listening to him, and he's upset. He's really upset that he's doing a digital story. And he sees no point in doing it whatsoever. And it's taking away from his time to study. But the funny thing is, the time he spent in my office complaining about it, he could have gotten it done. So he just comes and complains, and then one day he came and he had a whole map of his story. He planned it out and he created his storyboard, and he said, I want to show you something. And I said, okay. So he showed me his story, and I looked at it and I said, wow, that's amazing. And he said, yeah, he said, I stayed up a little bit last night and I thought it would be fun for me to try. And I said, that's great. I can't wait to see it. And do you need any help? How can I support? Do you know how to do the whole, all of that and adding the slideshow and putting the sound? And he said, yeah, don't worry about it. And I said, what? Okay. And so then, this is Alexi's story.
Hello everyone, my name is Alexei and I would like to tell you about my motherland, where I was born and grew up, Ukraine. Before I start, I want to apologize for my pronunciation. Don't judge me too strict. Thank you. Ukraine is an incredible country. You will ask where it is situated and what kind of culture is there, and here we have two answers. First, it is situated near Russia, and right away you picture the following. USSR. Russian Parliament, Kremlin. Vast and cold Siberia. Balalaika. Dance. And of course, vodka. Bears walking on the streets. Bears and vodka. Vodka and bears. From the other side, if I say
And when he showed this to the class, because I asked them all to share we had, 2 workshops where they just share their digital stories. And when he shared this, everyone was just laughing like you guys. And then afterwards I said, how are you feeling about it? You watch everyone's reaction to your story. And he said, I'm very proud. I feel so happy. And that made my day. And then I went home and I had a good teaching day that day. So for me, I think, it's important to amplify student voice in the ways that we can. So whether you're in the classroom or not, that should be one of our focus. Obviously, as educators, if you're not an educator, why would you do that? But as educators, for me, it's important to amplify student voice. And when I left the classroom, a couple of years ago, and I left because the college system basically pushed me out. They got rid of what Americans call adjunct faculty, contract faculty. So there was no longer contract faculty at the college, and I had to leave. I was a mom of 2 little girls one was just born and a 2-year-old, and my only options were either working a lot of hours under obviously no union, or very, very few hours. And as an English instructor with so many essays to grade, I thought I would be doing a disservice to my students to stay in the classroom. I would literally have no time to grade 15 plus hours of class. So 15 would be 5 classes. You'd have 5 classes. Each class is 40 students. You do the math. And every 2 weeks, we have an essay. So I decided to leave the classroom, and that was the hardest decision I've ever had to make. It was very heartbreaking because for me, being in the classroom, that's what I've always wanted to be. I wanted to be a teacher. And it was hard. So I went through, a lot of grief as well, being a mom, a new mom. That was kind of, a lot was happening at that time. But then I decided to do something else that I was working on in the classroom, outside of the classroom. And that is something related to digital writing and publishing. And when I was in the classroom, I saw that there was a gap between what we were teaching students and what they were actually applying. So students were able to either be very creative in their writing, but they weren't following the format that was required of them, usually the 5-paragraph standard essay. Or they follow the structure, but their essays were very dry and they weren't really connecting to the topics. And so I thought, there must be another way. There must be another way where we could teach writing and allow students to be engaged in writing at the same time. I wanted students to like writing. Why is that so hard? And so at that time, my husband and I, we created this inquiry-based process where basically it walks students through the writing process. So we created it as a workbook, and I thought, why not try it? And it asks students prompts. It's like, what are you talking about? What are you writing about? Why is this important, etc. It's a little bit more than that. But basically, it's a framework. And so when students walk through that framework, their essays, the results that I got, wow, I just couldn't believe the fact that they were able to move from description to analysis. Students weren't telling me about what the story was about anymore. They were telling me why it's important. Not only that, they were telling me why it's important and relating it back to their own opinions. And they were able to have their own opinions. They used to tell me, I don't have an opinion about this. I don't know anything about this topic. But after walking them through that framework, they did. And so we decided to create it into a publishing platform to amplify student voice. And so that's my story about leaving the classroom. The idea is that students can write about topics that they truly care about and be engaged in writing. That was the secret. It's like, it's not only the fact that they're writing about, dry topics that we're talking about, but they were talking about things that matter, things that are relevant to them. And more importantly, they were able to connect it to the real world. So oftentimes when I meet with students and classrooms now with working through the writing project, the students usually ask me a lot of questions. I meet with them to talk about my story as a refugee because many of the teachers I'm connected with, they think it's so important to talk about these issues. And they invite me to speak to their classrooms. So what's so interesting is that when I talk to classrooms, the teachers would have their students sometimes pre-write the questions to ask me, or sometimes students would just ask me questions. And so when I tell them my story, how I left Iraq and I came here as an English language learner, and these kids were in Brazil when I talked to them, and they're all English language learners. And they asked me, how was it like? And they don't ask me about, how can I be a better writer? They don't ask me about how can I improve my English, or how can I how can I improve my grammar? They don't ask about that stuff. But what they truly ask me are things that astonish me. They ask me, what was the hardest part about being a refugee, miss? Or what was it like? Did you have to go through racism when you came to Canada? And they're interested in these things. So they're interested in these topics that are human topics. It's what basically humanizes us. So oftentimes my answer to that when they asked me, what was the hardest part about being a refugee? That to them is always, one of the questions that they ask. And my answer is always not the fact that, I had to flee war, not the fact that, I still am a little bit traumatized from the sound of air raid sirens, not the fact that I left my country and my friends, but the fact that I was an English language learner here in Canada. Let you sit on that for a bit. Why was that so hard? Being an English language learner in Toronto school was the hardest part for me. We have to think about that. The fact that schools are not creating the safe environments that we need for our refugee kids, for our immigrant kids, for our students of color, for our LGBTQ kids, they're not doing that. And so the hardest part is often the bullying, the lack of tolerance. And, I tell them, I was in grade 5 when I came here to Canada. And, kids are not nice at that age when you don't speak English. And they nod because they know. They know the fact that bullying is, especially now, sadly, in our social and political climate, is rampant in the country, and it's extending here to Canada as well. I want to talk about educator empowerment, and that's how we are able to end this, hopefully. The fact that when educators are empowered, they have the power to change the classroom, and they have the power to change the world. I want to share a little bit of, I know you guys are getting restless, so just give me, I have a couple more slides. But I really wanted to share Dana's blog today. Educator on Twitter as well. If you're not following her, please do. She's fabulous. She's a professor. And she wrote a blog recently about what happened with 2 days ago. Is it 2 days ago? With when Trump banned trans people from the military. Yep, I see a lot of eye rolls. So that's what happened, and she wrote a blog post about it. Dana was really upset the fact that educators aren't often talking about these issues that we need to talk about. And her blog really resonated with me. And I thought that it's important for us all to hear. She says, for me, genderqueer, and sorry, it's very emotional, so grab some tissues. For me, genderqueer means that I sometimes identify with socially constructed male characteristics, sometimes with female, sometimes with both at the same time, and sometimes with neither. My genderqueer identity is transgender, although I don't often identify as such. I use she, her pronouns, but don't really care. I present as masculine off-center. You don't need to understand it. I just ask that you respect my identity. Goosebumps, because the fact of the matter is that students need to feel that in the classroom. We don't need to understand what they're feeling and who they are, but they all need to be respected. A little bit more. She says, why does it take Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, and Tamara Rice before educators think to include voices and narratives by Black and brown people in literacy classrooms? Why does it take the threat of a border wall and a ban on Muslims before educators think to include voices and narratives by immigrants? Why does it take the Dakota Access Pipeline to make news before Indigenous voices and narratives are included in literacy classrooms? We haven't the already 15 murders of trans women of color in the year 2017 not motivated literacy educators to include voices and narratives of trans people in the classrooms? Really? Her answer is privilege. Okay? And if you want to read the full blog post, I just read, the most powerful pieces, but the whole thing is just very powerful. If you want to read the full blog post, it's on her timeline right now. I shared this because it's so important to talk about what is currently happening at conferences. When we sit in conferences and, we can talk about digital pedagogy and we can talk about edtech and literacy and all of that. But if we don't humanize it and connect it to issues that are directly impacting students and educators, then what are we doing? Right? So it's so important to make that connection, whether we're at a conference or a PD or in the classroom, because that's how we maintain our humanity. Now, when I was at ISTE, has anyone been to ISTE before? Okay, so there's a few of you. And you know that ISTE is very EdTech focused. It's very focused on the EdTech and they don't talk about anything that's related to human or anything. It's getting a little bit better. Last year was my first time going there. Has anyone heard of Ruha Benjamin? Sorry, yeah, okay, some fans here. Yeah, she's amazing. She is, I didn't include her handle. She's at Ruha9, I believe, on Twitter. So if you follow her too, she's fabulous. She started off her ISTE keynote, and this was a little bit historical for ISTE because she's a Black woman, and she's the first Black woman to take ISTE stage. And she started off her keynote warning educators that we live in a time of social crisis. We live in a time where Muslim people are being banned for their religion. We live in a time where trans folks aren't having equal human rights. We live in a time where women, where people struck in poverty, where refugees that are fleeing war, poverty, and famine are not allowed to enter the States. And they have a hard time coming to Canada. And yeah, refugees are welcome here, but only 30,000 of them from Syria. But then there's 56 million refugees in the world currently. So that's the time that we live in. And so it's important to talk about these issues in the classroom because that's the future, and our students are the future. And if we're not going to cultivate that necessary feeling of humanity, then we lose our humanity. And so for me, I decided to focus on my students. The one takeaway is just focus on the students. Sometimes it takes bravery for us to do these acts of courage, the acts of talking about social justice on social media. If you're afraid of doing that, don't center yourself. It's not about you. It's about the students. It's not about you. It really isn't about you. And so for me, I have to constantly say that to myself for me to do the work. It's not about me. It's about them, okay? And that helps me to kind of be brave. It's not about me. I'm going to cross the border and I'm going to talk about being a refugee so that people become more tolerant of refugees, so that they see the humanity that refugees are people. And it's not about me. It's about the kids. And work together. I think that's the most important thing, is to work together. Working together, connecting with each other, getting people to help you when you want to do something that you don't know how to do. Connect with each other. I think there's so much power in asking for help. And oftentimes, it's not okay for us to ask for help because, it puts us in such an awkward position. But asking for help, how can I, the other day I had a workshop at Colorado, and the teacher said, we were sitting down, and she said, I want to help my students. I don't know how. They're all people of color, and my administration doesn't allow me to talk about race, and they're struggling. I don't know how, and I'm afraid to ask for help. And she asked us, and we helped her. And the most important thing is to be yourself and follow your passions for me, and to encourage students to do the same thing. And I know it's so hard to say that, because often when you follow your passion, it comes with a place of privilege. When I left the classroom and I decided to do something that I wanted to do, I was privileged to do that. Not many teachers were able to do that. My colleagues were left behind in really bad, terrible situations. Some of them had to take on double shifts and work at bars while, in the evening, and then they teach during the day. And so following your passion does come with from a place of privilege, but it's important to do something that, when you feel something, you do it, because usually when you follow your guts, it's the right thing to do. And the one thing I also want to leave you with is, don't be afraid to be the voice of encouragement. When you see something that you like, when you see somebody that did something amazing, whether in the classroom or online, tell that person, because to them, that might have been an act of bravery, and your encouragement would push them forward. And it can make such a big difference. It's my favorite quote, and I'll end you with that. Thank you so much.
Hello. Good. Okay. We have just a few more minutes for questions, and we do have some hors d'oeuvres coming in for a short reception afterwards. So you're happy for you all to continue the conversation. I am going to run the mic around so that you can speak your questions into the microphone. And thank you so much. It was so amazing to have you here. Thank you. Questions?
I have a question. One of the things that that I often run up against when I'm speaking with teachers and trying to encourage them to encourage, new sort of digital behaviors and new digital projects and that sort of thing in class is that sort of but they don't want to do it. And so if I don't, my students don't want to do something new. They don't want to try something new. And you had that experience with digital storytelling, with some other things. And I'm just curious, you said it took 2 weeks for us to get excited about it, which I thought was really lovely. What did you, do you have any thoughts about the strategies that you used during those 2 weeks to continue to build that excitement, even though the fact that the first thing they did was shut it down?
That's a good question. I overlooked, all the conversations that we had, and I feel like when I was during those 2 weeks, I was kind of telling them the importance of doing that, whether it's digital storytelling or blogging, and showing them why it's important for their voices to be out there. I did a lot of show and tell. I showed my own work. And they were inspired by that. I noticed that when they saw my work, whether it's a blog post, a silly blog post that didn't even get a lot of views, but they see the image and the title and all of that, and they kind of were really interested. They look at it like, okay, wow, maybe I could do this. But then I also tell them it's so important for your voices to be out there, because most of my students were, marginalized people, and students of color, international students, English language learners, and they're constantly being told by the system that their voices don't matter. And I feel like a part of, that whole 2 weeks process is just basically me telling them that their voices do matter and they can make a difference. And so we had a lot of conversations about why it's important for them to share their work and their opinions and point of views because, you know, they can make a difference. It's and the fact that they started to believe it, I saw it. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm an English language educator as well for elementary level. And it doesn't surprise me that you had a bad experience in the Toronto school system as an English language student, but I'd love to hear more about what your experience was like.
As a student, as an ELL student, yeah, it's an interesting question because students are always wanting to learn more about it because they went through the same thing or are going through the same thing. My experience, I felt like I arrived in grade 5 and I spoke no English whatsoever. And I felt like my voice was constantly being stifled by teachers, even though some teachers were very supportive, don't get me wrong. And I always talk about moments of empathy, the fact that, you know, I didn't have a favorite teacher, but I had favorite moments of teachers and their display of empathy. And the fact, see, one of my biggest struggles was, you know, I went through a lot of bullying and kids make fun of you and all of that and they call you names but my teachers didn't notice and those who did nothing. And that to me, I think is the most hurtful thing that I kind of, you know, it stayed with me as an adult. I'll share a positive story with you of one of my teachers who did notice, grade 6, Miss Fujimoto, amazing Japanese Canadian teacher, who always came to me when we had group work, you know, and I spoke nothing, so I would just sit there. And we would have group work and you know, she puts us in like 5 or 6 people group. And then, you know, I turn around my chair and I sit with the kids. And she would come to me and she would explain the instructions again and to make sure that I understand. But one day I was put in a group with, and I still remember their names, Jesse Clubs, Mohammed, and Mikey. And those guys were, I know, the biggest bullies the whole year. And so I was put in a group with them. And I felt, you know, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do this. It's a big project and I'm going to have to talk to these kids for a long time. And, you know, so they started their name calling and making fun of me, and they weren't doing their work. Like the whole time we were supposed to work on a group project, they're just making fun of me the whole time. And meanwhile, I'm sitting there writing out work, and I spoke no English, and I'm still doing the work for them. So it's ridiculous. So on my way out to, you know, the bell rang, and I was leaving the class, and Miss Fujimoto stopped me. And she said, wait, can you wait? And I said, okay. So everyone left, and she said, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to be very honest with me. And I thought I was in trouble. So I said, okay. And she said, when I put you in that group, are the boys bothering you? And I said, and here I was, I didn't want to be the snitch, you know? You know, there's kids' culture, the fact that, you know, if you tell on somebody, you're a snitch and it's not good, you know? And I think that's, I don't want to say it's universal, but I think it was universal. It's something that I got, you know, back home that you don't tell on people and you don't tell on people here. And so I thought for a moment, and I said, do I tell this woman about Mikey and Mohammed and Jesse? And she said, tell me the truth. And she said, I won't say anything to them. I just need to know. And I said, okay, yeah, they were mean. And they called me this and this and this. And she said, okay. She said, thank you so much for letting me know. And that's it, go catch your bus. And that was the end of the conversation. I don't know what Miss Fujimoto did that day or that morning, but the next day when I sat with those kids, they did not bother me whatsoever. They did nothing. You know, they were like, hey, Russell, let's work together. Yeah. And that stuck with me because she literally had to force me to tell her if I was being bullied. And I think that's what it takes for teachers. I think a lot of teachers didn't do that, and they weren't willing to go the extra mile of, forcing the kid, please tell me the truth. I know I know something's going on. It's not like she probably overheard, right? But I feel like if more teachers been doing that throughout the years, I think I would have had a much better experience, but sitting in classrooms often and, having to go through that, yeah. Thank you for your question.
I've got the mic. Thank you so much for the talk and that story, and I want to build. You talk about the importance of student voice, and I completely agree, and yet in the digital world in which we release student voices into, there is huge risk of bullying, and it's particularly, women, people of color are particularly vulnerable to sort of the weekend warriors, keyboard warriors. So how do you navigate and mitigate risk for your students, or talk to them about working in public? This is a conversation that my track is going to be having tomorrow, and I just wanted to have your input as we start.
It's a good question, and it's so important, especially right now. I'm having different conversations when we're working with schools. As a teacher, you have your own set of, again, like the part of that Sean asked me, the 2 weeks, part of that was basically me talking to them about being digital citizens and what does that mean, and how we need to behave in the same way that we would in real life. And if we are not going to say that in real life, or we're not going to write it on a piece of paper and pen, then we're not going to also tweet it or put it on a blog. And so we had obviously that conversation, but right now when I talk to schools and teachers, that's their biggest concern as well, is that bullying online and social media. And I always think it's important to know the tool. Like we use a lot of tools and we don't know what their features are. And again, I don't want this to be an attack conversation, but it is kind of. It's we need to figure out the different ways that the tool provides for us to protect ourselves. I think that's so important. For example, if students are gonna blog on a platform or a website or whatever it is, then make sure that they would have like what do you call it? Comment moderation. To go through that before the comments are posted, and sometimes you have to figure that out on the platform, make sure that's working properly and they have that selected. Or if students' privacy is so important for especially K-12 teachers, obviously anonymous names here can be used as well. So many teachers would use like Jenna K, and they wouldn't use students' full names. I think that's really important. There are different ways, but I think what the most important part about it is just having that conversation with students, but also asking them about their comfort level as well. So sometimes a lot of my English language learners weren't comfortable sharing their work with other people because they didn't want to have mistakes in their writing. And so we had that conversation, the fact that it's okay to make mistakes. And many teachers tell the students the opposite. They say, you have a grammar error here. Or even us, like as educators, when I tweet something out and, like I had a typo in my tweet this morning, I'm like, what did I say? I said, my morning read before DigPad, and instead of read, it autocorrected to ready. And here I am being like, oh, I'm not gonna delete it, that's okay. But we focus too much on like, oh, I don't want people to see my mistakes, and so I'm not gonna publish my work. That's a hurdle that we need to help students get over. Yeah, I don't know if I kind of went off topic a little bit. But hey.
I feel like we're on a chat show now because we're right here. Move further away, that works. Oh, you? Nice. It's a good job it's not me doing it to you, otherwise I'd do the gifting. Anyway, you spoke quite proprietorially and adorably about your librarian, and I know there are librarians and academics in this room, so I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that relationship so we can help other people in the room bridge that gap.
Oh, that's so cute. My librarian is amazing, and her name is Jennifer Peters. She was my librarian. Sadly, obviously, I'm not in the classroom now, but so that relationship kind of developed when I started to do research workshops with my students. We started the nonfiction portion, and I had them do a research assignment, and I really wanted to not do the MLA portion of things and show them how to cite myself. And so I said, there must be another way. Why do I have to sit there and teach them all this boring information? It needs to be automated. And the automation was the librarians. They had all of it set up properly with, their websites and their workshops. And so I reached out to Rosalie and I reached out to Jennifer, and they said, yeah, we definitely do workshops. And it's funny because I didn't know they did. And they come and they talk to us in the beginning of the year before the semesters start, during what are they called, faculty orientation. And they do say the services they provide, obviously, but a lot of us miss that faculty orientation. And so I kind of had to figure it out myself. And so, but they're amazing. And so I go to them, they're like, just book your workshops. And they make it so easy that, I just send them an email and be like, can we do this, this, this? And they say, yes, yes, yes. And, they schedule it. And then I take my class to the lab and I do nothing for that 1 hour. I do like a lesson plan or mark while they're sitting there talking about the boring citations and how to find credible sources on the journals of Seneca College. And so that relationship was so important to me because it allowed me to not do the work that, duplicate work, basically. It doesn't make sense for me to do something that the librarians are doing already. And I tell my students the librarians are the most helpful people that you would find on campus. They're always willing to help people, always. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Another round of applause. So we'll have a reception. There's some lovely looking food back there, and you can hang out and chat. I'm sure she's happy to answer more questions one-on-one. And we will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. when we'll have breakfast and some opening remarks before we jump back into our tracks. And I think we have arranged successfully to have more coffee be here tomorrow morning.